Bonjour mesdames et messieurs, mon nom est Ariel Helwani, je suis ici à Montréal, Québec, Canada avec le monsieur avec le chapeau, monsieur Chuck Mindenhall de MMAFightingonSBN. Nous sommes ici pour UFC 196 et samedi soir ça va être Demetrius Johnson contre Kyoji Horiguchi pour le UFC flyweight title. Hello again, everyone. I'm Ariel Helwani here in Montreal, Quebec, Canada, my hometown for UFC 186. This is the MMAFighting.com preview show. Chuck, scale of 1 to 10, how impressed are you with what I just said at the top of the show?
Je t'aime, Ariel. Nah, you did very well. I didn't know what I did catch the hat thing though. That's good. I knew that much.
I said le monsieur, the man, avec, with le chapeau, hat.
Yep. Yeah, with the chapeau. Here I am.
The chapeau.
Montreal.
Yes. On the spot. Greatest moment in Montreal MMA history. What comes to mind?
Well, for me, it would still be the GSP Condit fight.
Really? Why that one?
Just because Condit rocked him, and if just for a minute the air went out of that building, and you thought that this is the end of GSP's reign. It just looked that way for just a second, and he recovered, and he got it back, and the crowd sort of got back into it. But just that moment was pretty nuts for me.
Which setting do you prefer? This beautiful old Montreal or Times Square where we were last week?
It's a lot warmer in Times Square, as a matter of fact. But I tell you what, I love Montreal. You're lucky, man. You get to go to both places. You're sort of binational. But this, look at this. I mean, it's a beautiful city, and
you can't beat
I wish they would start booking the shows out here in June or something like that, so we could sit out on the water and drink beer and stuff. But we're always here when we have to wear jackets.
And no topless ladies around here.
No topless ladies this time.
At least walking the streets. I think you can find them elsewhere. Yeah, Montreal is known for that sort of thing. But let's talk about UFC 186. This has been a card that has been very much scrutinized, but it received some good news this week. How about that? Out of left field, Rampage Jackson now back on the card. How much does this save the card, help the card? Do you think he actually moves the needle at this point in his career?
I think he does to an extent. I mean, just even the media response today, as soon as he came out and sat down, all the media gravitated right towards him. Obviously, you look at Rampage Jackson, former champion, all the, Pride legend and all this. He still has that, he's still going to have that. And it doesn't hurt that I guess he sort of put his name back into what you might call relevancy in Bellator for those 3 fights, kind of got back on the track. He comes back, he carries the same baggage, all the weird stuff's going on again. All the drama surrounding the fight, all of a sudden he's back on the card 5 days beforehand. It kind of adds a little bit of like a, some surreal nature to this whole thing. I don't know how much it ultimately does. I don't know in terms of buying units, like how many, what it'll mean. It's not the greatest matchup, honestly, like Maldonado. It's a fun fight, but it's like a Bellator fight in some ways. But it can't help to have him on the card,
Did you think what I was thinking when you heard that it had been changed to a 215-pound catchweight fight? What I thought was, well, Rampage hasn't been training ever since he thought he was off the card. 215 pounds, what's that all about?
Well, I wondered about that immediately when he was coming back. I was like, are they going to do it 205? Obviously, he has a hard time getting down to 205. We've been through these issues before. So it didn't really surprise me, but at the same time, that does cross your mind. You're like, well, where was he at? What has he been doing for the couple of weeks that he wasn't going to be in the fight? Did he go on a bender and eat a bunch of food and kind of stop training? Or where is he at mentally? We always had to worry anyway a little bit about Rampage and his motivation coming into fights. This one's certainly no different. I mean, he's coming back to the UFC, but just given the sort of turbulence his whole ride has been in the UFC so far to get to this point, really interesting to see how that plays out.
Do you think there is one takedown attempt in this fight?
If I was Maldonado, I would certainly try, but probably not, because I feel like Maldonado's happy to stand in wheelhouse and trade and kind of fight that. He loves that kind of fight as well. It's really good matchmaking from the fun perspective, because Rampage, obviously, when he left the UFC before, was getting tired of guys who wanted to wrestle him. The whole Ryan Bader in Japan thing, like, he was very vocal about that. So these are the kind of fights he wants, and a great opponent for him to come back to.
We're not lawyers. We're not experts at this stuff. But honestly, are you surprised that he's actually fighting on this card?
Yeah, because I'd already resolved that he wasn't. Just like everybody else, we're writing columns and we're doing all this stuff. He's
given the facts of the situation, that he had a contract and he's claiming that they didn't give him the numbers. I feel like there was enough ambiguity there where it was like, maybe he's not going to make it.
Yeah, that was my take exactly. And like you said, I'm not a lawyer. I just go off of the information. Actually, Luke Thomas, our colleague, has been really sort of following it a lot more. I was really going off of what he was learning from the people he was talking to, and it didn't seem like that was a possibility that he was going to fight on this card. So for them to suddenly turn around and now he's fighting, I was just as stunned. I thought it was a joke at first. I thought he was just sending out a tweet that sort of have fun, but turns out he wasn't.
So what do you think? Does this fight, actually, end up being the fun slugfest that a lot of people are hoping it will be? Is it a rather dull affair? What are you expecting out of these two?
I hope that it's one of those types of fights because they both like to, they both like to throw down. But there's so many question marks. Obviously, like just Rampage coming into this fight again with the turbulence beforehand, you're not sure where he'll be in this fight 100%. And I don't know. To me, it's like if I'm Maldonado, I don't try to go in there and try to knock him out. Right? I'd almost try to like gas out Rampage a little bit just to see where his gas tank is, see where he's at. Remember, he last fought in Bellator in May. It's been 11 months. We're not even getting into like any kind of cage rust situation. Because we're so focused on what's been going on immediately. But it's been a long time since he's been in. He's going to be 37 in June. He could be, he may not have the exact same tools, or he may be he may gas out a little earlier. If I'm Maldonado, though, I'd be exploring that a little bit. I'd be a little patient in those exchanges and maybe try to catch him second, third round.
Your official pick?
I'm still going Rampage, though. I think that Rampage likes to throw them bungalows, and I think that he's facing a guy who doesn't have the greatest reaction pace. Like he doesn't get his head out of the way very quickly. Yeah. And I feel like, he can absorb a lot of punishment, but I think if he gets clocked just right from Rampage, he's going down.
And we should also note that you almost nailed that Luke Rockhold-Machida fight from last week, almost to the second. Yeah. You said it was going to be a second round finish at 231, and it ended up being 321. Is that accurate?
That's correct, yes.
Wow.
Yeah. It was. I was just had the numbers mixed up. It was foggy there. Sure, it was a little fog.
So we need some exact numbers here. Is this going to go the full 15, or is he going to finish him?
I think Rampage will finish him, and I'm gonna say, even though I just said that Maldonado should be patient, I think he's not going to be. I think ultimately it's going to be 4-16 of the first round. Wow. It's a TKO.
All right, watch out for that. Now let's go up to the main event. Kind of weird that we started with the co-main event.
Get this kind of specific from me.
From the man with the hat, Chuck Mindenhall. Okay, let's go to the main event. Of course, much has been talked about this one in the sense that it's always that kind of referendum on his career and his drawing power. Demetrius Johnson, should he be main eventing and whatnot? Do you kind of feel bad for him at this point? Like, he's getting out of his shell a little bit, and you could tell that he's getting a little bit annoyed. He's dropping the F-bombs, and he's saying, look, if you don't want to watch me, don't watch me. I don't care. But do you feel bad that a champion who has accomplished what he has accomplished still has to answer these questions at this point?
Well, look at us. We're sitting here talking about Rampage Jackson before we even got to him. But ultimately, yes. And I kind of talked to him about that. I'm sure you might have, in the scrum, we're talking to him too. I asked him about that. You start to get a little bit defiant because you're answering these kinds of questions. It's not like he's had the best opponents to help push it. He hasn't gotten John Dodson. They've tried to get that fight together. That might help him a little bit because he'd have a guy sort of thumping his chest a little bit and get riling things up. But he's, Bagatinov, Chris Carrioso, these guys are just not the kinds of John Moraga. They're just not the kinds of guys who are going to stir the pot for him. Sure. And so it sort of falls to his shoulders as the champion at that point to sort of build interest. Well, he wants his fighting to do the work, and he's done that magnificently. And we've been through this whole paradox many times. It's just it hasn't translated into like something compelling for people to tune in. It just tells you how complex the fight game can be in terms of charisma and hype and everything else that goes into it. And for some reason, it's just it just hasn't clicked for him 100%. But I will say that I do sense that he's tired of that sort of question, that line of questioning. He's defiant. And he really believes in the big picture that eventually we'll all come around and understand the great Mighty Mouse that he is.
Is the UFC doing him a disservice by putting him in these situations, trying to group him and the bantamweight title, which was supposed to be the main event? It didn't happen because of Dillashaw's injury. Trying to put those two halves into one, as opposed to grouping him with a John Jones or a Chris Weidman or a Ronda Rousey, who are bigger draws. I feel like that's the route they should take.
They definitely should.
Or put him on free TV.
Absolutely. And I think the association is what you're talking about. You get a big build of, let's say that Cormier and Jones were fighting in January, and somehow that was your co-main. That's going to draw a lot of eyeballs no
one would talk about his drawing power.
That's what I'm saying. It would just be a lot less pressure on him to sort of have to think about those avenues of how to sell the fight, et cetera, et cetera. But I agree with you 100%. When they put this card together, this card has taken on many iterations since, which is unfortunate. But when they put it together, I originally was thinking, that's sort of a bummer for Montreal, even with the two title fights. And it was mostly because you did feel like they were just sort of packaging those belts, which diminishes them. I don't know what they think about that. I know that they look at it as you get two title fights, but it diminishes both to do that. I think you got to, when you don't have guys who are just big sellers and big time champions like that, you got to stick them. You got to put them with people where the eyeballs are going to go, and then get people interested that way.
Boxing and MMA are the only sports where if you're not the most dynamic personality, it hurts your wallet. You know, I brought up this example this week. Alex Rodriguez is a pretty boring guy, but he still commands $250 million because he wins and he's a good player. If you're a boring tennis player, you still don't suffer because you just have to win. But here, winning is not enough. Right. And for Demetrious Johnson, he has to start recognizing that. I think he's starting to recognize it to a degree, but some people just don't want to do that sort of thing, and you know, it's I guess too bad for him. Do you think Kyoji Horiguchi, who's done virtually no media leading up to this fight, he's been tucked away in Japan, save for one day at AKA, which they really built up on the countdown show? Do you think he has anything to offer, Demetrious?
I mean, you'd like to think so, because honestly, one of the big things that was sticking out about this fight did not look that competitive to me. I know that Horiguchi's a young guy, 24 years old. He's looked very good, but it just seems like this is too soon for him to kind of go against a guy this season who's incrementally looked better, I think, under Matt Hume each time he's been out there. Like, he's one of those guys you really see him putting it together more and more as he goes. So it seems like it might be too soon for him, but you know, he's crafty and he's definitely, you know, he's carrying some power in his hands and stuff. You never know. You never know in a fight like this, but unfortunately when we're saying you never know, or he's got a puncher's chance or stuff like that, it usually doesn't add up to anything beneficial to those guys.
So what's the official prediction?
I'm going to go with Mighty Mouse. I think he'll get the finish. I'll say later, though, like maybe fourth round, somewhere in there. But I think
what's the time? We need the time.
Oh, a minute and 13 seconds in the fourth round.
Yeah, I still can't forget him telling me after the Luis Gaudino fight that he doesn't think he's ready for a title shot. Now here he is in his next fight. Yeah. Fighting for the belt. Interesting. Okay, before we go, because I can't feel my ears anymore, Michael Bisping, CB Dollaway. Both guys coming off bad losses. Both, you know, been around the block. Of course, Bisping a big draw. Who has more pressure on their shoulders going into this fight?
I would think Bisping, because you talk to him and he still harbors an idea that he's going for a title shot. And I don't have the heart to tell him otherwise, but at the same time, if he doesn't win this fight, he's never going to get that title shot. And honestly, he probably never will anyway, because he's going to have to string together there's a lot of monsters ahead of him in that division. If he wants, those aspirations all go away if he loses this fight. So in my mind, he's the guy under the most pressure.
There are a lot of big draws who have never won a belt. He might be the biggest draw of all time who has never fought for a belt. That's amazing. Kyoji Horiguchi is going to fight for a belt. Michael Bisping may never fight for a belt. That seems almost criminal. I feel sad for him if he never gets that shot, because he's done a lot for this sport and he's a huge draw. I mean, there are a lot of people who would have bought that pay-per-view if he was fighting for the belt for whatever strange reason.
He helped bring him to the UK. He helped sort of bridge that whole thing, get the madness going on over there. I always think back to that UFC 100 knockout at Dan Henderson. I mean, obviously that's the one. He's at this pinnacle. He's been there a couple of times, but just that particular one, all the spotlight, it would have been so huge if he'd somehow beat Dan Henderson that night. And he's just one of those guys, man. Every time he got to the altar, he just couldn't go the rest of the way. So I feel bad for him. I think he's sort of fighting an uphill battle now, but hopefully, you know, he's still got some fun fights left in him, and we'll see how it goes. But if he loses this one, I think he can hang up his dream of having a belt.
Your pick?
I'm going to take – I've been torn on this one. I'm leaning towards taking a decision for Bisping. Okay. Yeah, I think he'll do enough to outpoint him.
All right, that does it for us. UFC 186, just hours away from beautiful Montreal, Quebec, Canada. It's a great sports week here in Montreal with the Canadians, of course, playing the Ottawa Senators in the NHL playoffs. But hopefully for all of us, all eyes on the Bell Center Saturday night as Demetrious Johnson defends his flyweight title one more time against Kyoji Horiguchi. We'll have our usual Fight Night coverage for you, so do not go anywhere. For now, we say goodbye. That is Chuck. I am Ariel. Thank you so much for watching. We will see you on Saturday night. Bonne soirée.